We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 71b. The Gemara said in the previous summon that a person is allowed to be an arev, a guarantor, when it comes to a loan with interest. And so the Gemara now asks, arev laman, what does it mean? He's a guarantor to whom? Rashi says, arev laman mihu hamalve, meaning to say, who is the lender, shani muter lasos lo arev, that this Jewish person is allowed to be a guarantor for this loan, and the loan was made with interest. Who is that? The Gemara says, ilema arev li Yisrael. If you're going to say the case is that he's a guarantor, and the lender is a Jew, so that's not true of Hatana, but it was taught. Elu over and below Sase, the following individuals, they transgress the negative commandment of lending with interest. Hamalve, v'halova, the lender and the borrower. Ha'arev, the guarantor seems to be included. V'ha'edim, and the witnesses as well. So it can't be we're talking about a guarantor who's going to pay the loan to a lender who is Jewish. That certainly would be a problem of ribis. So elul nachri, rather what it means is that a non-Jew is the one that lent the money with interest, so you could be a guarantor on such a loan. That's not going to be a problem. The Gemara says, "V'chevon de dine de nachri de azal basar arva." The Gemara says, however, it's problematic because the halacha in the non-Jewish courts is that the non-Jew, meaning the non-Jewish lender, he doesn't just collect from the borrower; he actually collects directly from the guarantor, and then the guarantor goes ahead and he collects from the borrower. Now, since that is the law in the non-Jewish courts, so iu niu de kashakal minei revisa, what's going to end up happening is the arev is now going to go to the borrower and say, "You owe me the money and you owe me the interest," and effectively the arev is going to be collecting from a Jew a loan with interest, so it should still be a problem to be an arev for such a loan. And so the Gemara answers to that. Amar Rav Sheshes says, Shekibel olav lodun bedinei Yisrael, that the case over here was, even though it was a loan from a non-Jew, but he said that he was going to have it adjudicated by the Jewish law, by the Jewish courts, and so therefore he wasn't going to go to the arev to collect the loan. He was going to go to the borrower first. So the Gemara says, he kibel olav lodun bedinei Yisrael, but if the non-Jew accepted that he was going to follow Jewish law, so ribis nami lo lishkol, so he shouldn't be taking interest at all. So why is he collecting interest? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Shakibel olav lazu v'lo kibel olav lazu. He accepted the Jewish law in terms of who to collect from when it comes to a guarantor, but he did not accept the Jewish law when it comes to the issue of collecting with interest. And Rashi explains, V'akevan denachri basar arva azil, since according to the non-Jewish law, the non-Jew is going to collect directly from the guarantor, meaning Eino Toveya Ela Es Arev, he's only claiming from the Arev, he's only making a claim from the guarantor. So who knew the Shakal Ribis? It emerges that the Arev is actually collecting interest. The idea is as follows: Arev Zeh Halovim and Anachri. What actually happened is the Arev is the initial borrower essentially from the non-Jew. The Chazer V'Hilveli Yisrael, and then basically he borrowed from the non-Jew and lent to the Jew, and now the Jew is going to pay him back with interest. That's a problem. And so the Gemara then answered, Lodun b'dinei Yisrael. In this regard, the non-Jew agreed to follow the Jewish law. What that means is as follows: Yitva min halovet chila, meaning the non-Jew is first going to try to collect from the borrower. Uchshelo yimtza etzlo, if he doesn't find money by the borrower, at that point yigva min ha'arev. That's when he goes and collects from the arev. And why does that solve the problem? Rashi explains, V'hashta ina arev lovim etchila. Now, the arev is not the borrower like the first borrower. When you follow the non-Jewish law, it's almost as if the lovan needs money from the non-Jew, but he doesn't borrow directly from the non-Jew. Instead, he tells the Arev, can you borrow the money from the non-Jew? The Arev borrows the money from the non-Jew, does that on interest. The Arev then lends the money to the borrower on interest. Then you have a real problem because the Arev is going to pay back the non-Jew with interest and then going to collect the loan from the Lova with interest. But over here in this situation where the non-Jew really goes to the borrower first, so really it's as if at the moment the Arev comes into the picture, he's lending the Jew money. Meaning, V'hashta eino Arev lova mitchila. The Arev is not the lova at the outset. He's not the lova at the beginning. Hilkach kipara l'nachri. So therefore, when the arev comes along and pays the non-Jew because the Jewish borrower can't pay, it's actually at that moment that he's effectively lending money to the Jewish borrower. That's what's happening. The Jewish borrower needed to really pay back. He couldn't pay back the loan with the interest. He couldn't pay back at all. And so therefore, at that moment, the arev lends him the money with the interest. Now, essentially, he's not charging interest to the borrower. He's lending the borrower money, and he's going to collect that exact amount of money back. What he lends to the borrower, that he collects back. That's why it's not a problem. Again, if the non-Jew, is following the Jewish law when it comes to collecting from a guarantor. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Malvi Yisrael ma'osav shel nachri midas hanachri v'chulu. A Jew is allowed to lend out the money of a non-Jew with the knowledge of the non-Jew. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Malvi Yisrael ma'osav shel nachri midas hanachri. The Jew is allowed to lend out the money of the non-Jew with the knowledge of the non-Jew. Avalo midas Yisrael, but he can't do that with the knowledge of the Jew. That would be a problem. And the Brisa continues, Keitzad, how so? Yisrael shall love him most min hanachri b'ribis. Let's say a Jew borrows money from a non-Jew, and he borrows that money with interest. Ubikesh lachzirim lo, he wants to return the money to the non-Jew. Matzu Yisrael acher, but then another Jew finds this Jewish borrower. V'yamar lo, and he says to him, Tinamli, just give the money to me, the exact same loan you got for $100, just give it to me. V'ani aleloch kederech sha'atam alelo, and then I'm going to pay you interest in the same way that you're going to pay him interest. So essentially, I'll take the loan of $100 from you, I'll pay you back a little more than $100, and then you'll pay the non-Jew back a little more than the $100. Usr, that is going to be usr, it's forbidden, because essentially he's taking a loan from a Jew with interest, that's a problem. However, vim hamido eitzel nachri, if he stands him up by the non-Jew, he basically transfers the debt over from himself, meaning Lova number 1 says, instead of me paying you back, he says that to the non-Jew, instead let the second Jew pay back, the loan will basically go to him, so now it's considered coming from the non-Jew, so then mutter, it's going to be mutter. And the Brisa continues, V'chein nachri shalav amos mi Yisrael b'ribis. Let's say the other way around. Let's say the non-Jew borrowed money from the Jew with interest, ubikesh lachzirim lo, and now the non-Jew wants to return the money. Matzu Yisrael acher, and then another Jew finds this non-Jew, v'yamar lo, and he says to the non-Jew, to name li vani aleloch kederech shatam alelo. You just give it to me, and then I'll pay you the interest the same way you're going to pay him the interest. So mutter, that's mutter, because then he's simply taking a loan from a non-Jew with interest. It's not a problem. However, vim hamido eitzel Yisrael, if he stands him up by the original lender, by the Yisrael, so now essentially he's transferring the debt. The debt is now not from the non-Jew to the Jew, but rather it's being transferred to the second Jew, who's now the borrower. That second Jew becomes the borrower instead of the non-Jew. So that's also, that's going to be problematic. It's essentially a loan from a Yisrael, from a Jew with ribis. And the Gemara says, B'shalama seifa l'chumra, I understand the end of the brisa, so that's a chumra, that's simply a stringency. And Rashi explains, B'shalama seifa d'katanim hamido eitzel Yisrael asr. It says in the seifa that if he brings the Jew in, so then it's going to be forbidden. Again, that case is that the non-Jew is the original borrower, and now the non-Jew is going to give the money to a Jew, and that Jew is going to become the borrower. So there we understand we're being machmir. Why? Demashma shenochri zeh choshev shlucho shel Yisrael. What's essentially happening is this non-Jew is basically the agent of the original Jewish lender. When the non-Jew gives the money to the next borrower, to the Jew who's going to be the borrower, he's not giving his own money. It's not as though the non-Jew is lending to the Jew with ribis. Rather, he's like the agent, he's like the shliach of that first Jewish lender, and therefore chumra d'rabbanan hu l'meiser. It's a chumra d'rabbanan that we're strict. Really, the non-Jew can't really be a shliach because there is no shlichus for non-Jews, but we say it's a chumra d'rabbanan and it's aser. The hadakaimel and the shlucho shel adam kamoso, because Rashi says, when we say the concept of shlucho shel adam kamoso, that an agent is considered like the person himself, b'sholeach Yisrael, u'shliach Yisrael, that's generally talking about where the sholeach, the one sending the agent, is a Jew, and the agent is a Jew. Namar, that's what it's talking about. To me, Truma Gamrina, because we learn from Truma. Beperek Sheni de Kiddushin, in the second parak of Kiddushin, Atem, Gamatem, L'Rabo Shluchachem. We learn from the pasuk, Ma'atem b'nei bris, Af Shluchachem b'nei bris. Just like you are b'nei bris, you are part of the covenant, you are Jewish. So too the halach of Shliach, so too your Shluchim will be b'nei bris. And so we understand it over here. It is simply a chumrah that we're considering the non-Jew to be a Shliach. But Ela Reisha, but what about in the first case? Rashi says, Ela Reisha, in the beginning of the Brisa, the Katani, Im Hamido Eitzel Nachri Mutter, there the original lender was a non-Jew, and if they bring the non-Jew in, so then suddenly we say it's Mutter, because it's through Shlichus, it's as if you're really borrowing from the non-Jew, so now we're using Shlichus Lekula, we're using Shlichus as a leniency, and so that's problematic. That's what the Gemara says. Ela Reisha Kevan Dein Shlichus Lenachri, but in the first case of the Brisa, since there is no Shlichus for a non-Jew, Ihu Niu so really, the interest is really going from one Jew to the other. As Rashi says, Kevan dein Torah shlichus lenachri v'Yisrael mi-Yisrael kiblem. It's really a Jew getting the money from the Jew. So who knew the shakal ribbis? So he's taking interest. How are we using shlichus lekula in the beginning of the brisa? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna bar Manoach mishmei de Rav Acha b'rei de Ravika. Rav Huna bar Manoach said in the name of Rav Acha, the son of Ravika. And here, what are we talking about? The case over there is that again, the original lender was a non-Jew. He lent to a Jew, and then he said, just put put the money, the non-Jew says to the Jew, that first Jewish borrower, put the money on the ground and you will be patur. And essentially, you're not going to be the one lending the money to the second Jew. It really will be a loan coming directly from me. Rashi says, "Da'amar lo nachri li Yisrael Rishon." The non-Jew says to the first Jew, "Hanicham al gabe karka v'pater." Just put it on the ground and you'll be exempt. V'cheinasa, that's what he does. Umisham natlam Yisrael sheni, and from there the second Jew took it, and so therefore that's why it's a problem. You don't even need to resort. That's why it's not a problem. You don't need to resort to shlichus over there. Essentially, the first Jewish borrower removed himself from the picture. The Gemara says, "Yachi, if so, ma'ila memer." So what does that even need to be said for? What basically happened is the first Jewish borrower essentially paid off his debt by putting it on the ground. And now you have a new loan between the non-Jew and the second Jew. It's not even a chiddush. And so the Gemara says, El Amar Papa, rather Papa says, Kegon Shanatal V'Nasan Biad. The case is that he actually pays back the non-Jew, and then the non-Jew goes and lends to the second Jew. That's of course going to be the same problem. Rashi says, Kegon Shanasa V'Nasan Hanachri Biad V'Kiblam Min Harishon. The non-Jew accepts back the payment from the first borrower, Unasanam L'Sheni, and then he gives it to the second person. He essentially makes a loan to the second person. And so the Gemara asks the exact same question, but still, what does that need to be said for? Of course you're allowed to do that. Essentially, the non-Jew is collecting from the first and then makes a new loan to the second. And the Gemara says to that, there is a bit of a chiddush. What might you have said? Nachri gufe ki ovid adaita di Yisrael kagomer v'yoev. The non-Jew, the reason why he's lending to the second Jew is because the first Jew essentially said that you can trust this second Jew, so maybe it really is like coming from the Jew. Kamash malon, that's what it's teaching us. That's not a problem. And Rashi explains, adaita di de di Yisrael, he did it with the knowledge, he did it because of that first Jewish borrower, sharehu heviu etzlo, because the first Jewish borrower essentially brought the non-Jewish lender to the second borrower. V'have nachri shluchos, then maybe you'll say that the nachri, the non-Jew, is really like an agent of that first Jew. V'nachmer midrabanan, maybe we should be machmer on a derabanan level. L'meisar, we should say it's prohibited. Kidim machmerinan b'seifa, like we are strict in the end of the brisa. You might have thought that that's what the brisa is saying, is that we are not strict in that regard. And the Gemara continues, Rav Ashi says, Ki amrinon ein shlichus lenachri, when we say that there's no shlichus for a non-Jew, hani mili b'truma, that's only true by truma. Aval b'chol Torah kula yesh shlichus lenachri, but in every other area of the Torah there is shlichus for a non-Jew. What Rav Ashi is essentially arguing is that it is working through shlichus over here. Again, you have a situation where that original lender is a non-Jew, and then he lends to the first borrower. The first borrower is Jewish, and now the first borrower says to the non-Jew, look, let me just give the money to the second Jewish borrower, and really he's acting as a shliach for the non-Jew, and there is shlichus for non-Jews. It's only by truma that there's no shlichus for non-Jews. But the Gemara says, "V'hadar Rav Ashi berusahi," that which Rav Ashi says, it is not correct. Some have bidusa, it's like a joke. Either way, the point is what Rav Ashi is saying is not correct, because ma'ishna truma delo. What's the difference by truma that there's no shlichus? Techsiv atem, gam atem, it says in the pasuk, gam atem, ma'atem b'nei bris, af shluchachem nami b'nei bris. We learn out from the extra word in the pasuk, we learn out just like you are Jew, we learn out the concept of shlichus, but we say just like you are b'nei bris, so too your shluchim have to be b'nei bris. So shlichus t'chol Torah kula nami mitruma gamrinan la. Shlichus in the entire Torah also we learn from truma. They all follow the same halachas, and so there's no shlichus for non-Jews. Ela de Rav Ashi berusahi, rather again Rav Ashi, what Rav Ashi said was an error. The Gemara says, Ika Damri, there are those that say a slightly different version. Amar Rav Ashi says, Ki amrinon ein shlichus lanachri. When do we say there's no shlichus for a non-Jew? Hani mili inu lididon. That is when it's them for us. However, aval but anon lididhu, for us to be a shliach for them, meaning like in this case, the original lender is the non-Jew, in the reish of the brisa, and then that first Jew is basically acting as a shliach of the non-Jew, and that's why the loan is considered to be coming from the non-Jew to the second Jewish borrower. So anon lididhu havina lahu shliach. There we could be a shliach. But the Gemara says again, v'had Rav Ashi berusahi, that which Rav Ashi says is an error. Ma'ishna inu lididon. What's the difference when it's them for us to lo that it can't be a shliach? T'chsiv atem gam atem l'rabba shluchachem, because we learn from gam atem to include your shluchim atem b'nei bris af shluchachem b'nei bris. Just like you are part of the covenant, so too the shliach has to be part of the covenant. The other direction also, anon lididhu nami. If we're the shliach for them as well, ma'atem b'nei bris ka'amar. The idea is it has to be atem b'nei bris. The original person sending the agent has to be b'nei bris, and that doesn't apply, of course, if the original lender is a non-Jew. Elo hadar Rav Ashi berusahi, rather what Rav Ashi says is a mistake. And the Gemara continues, Ravina says, Nihid shlichus lenachri lesle. It's granted, it's true that there is no shlichus for a non-Jew, and so therefore you cannot explain the beginning of the brisa as using shlichus, and that's why it's okay. But zechia midrabanan islay. But there is a concept of zechia midrabanan midi dehave a katan, just like we find by a minor. By a minor, there's no shlichus, but there's zechia. Katan lava afagav delesle shlichus. When it comes to a minor, isn't it true that even though a minor does not have shlichus? And Rashi explains, Shlichus t'chol Torah kula shi'ei shlucho kamosa, the concept of shlichus in the entire Torah, that a shliach is like the person sending the shliach, mitruma gamrinan la b'kiddushin. We learn it out from Truma. Aval anon l'didhu, then the Gemara suggested when it comes to us for them, kagon reisha debraisa have a shliach, meaning if we are the shliach of the non-Jew, that is good. The seifa l'chumra kedamer, and again the seifa will be l'chumra. That's a stringency there. Anon l'didhu nami, but then the Gemara said, even if it's us for them, ma'atem b'nei bris, it says you are b'nei bris, meaning the people who are sending the shliach. V'atem hainu sholchim. The atem refers to those sending. Lo nemra shlichus ela b'sholeach Yisrael u'shliach Yisrael. The point is, shlichus only applies when the sholeach is Jewish and the shliach is Jewish. Man degaris hacha af shluchachem b'nei bris mishtabish. If you have the girsa over here of shluchachem b'nei bris, that's a mistake, because here we're not talking about the agent, we're talking about the person sending the agent at this point in time in the Gemara. And Rashi continues, Ravina said, Zechia midrabanan islay, even though there is no shlichus for the non-Jew, but there is zechia on a drabanan level. It means Sheyeh Yisrael zochel etzorech nachri. It means that a Yisrael can take possession on behalf of a non-Jew. Hilkach hahu Yisrael zochel midrabanan b'halvazu mi Yisrael. They change it to mi Yisrael Rishon. The point is, this Yisrael will be zocha on behalf of the non-Jew. So when the second Yisrael borrows the money from the first Yisrael, what he's really doing is he's being zocha in the money on behalf of the non-Jew. It's as if it's the non-Jew's money already. Then he's borrowing the money from the non-Jew for interest. That's not going to be a problem. You're not using shlichus over here, you're actually using zechia. And Rashi continues, katan lesle shlichus. A katan, there is no shlichus for a katan. Techi kasav shlichus begadol kasav, beroi litrum, because it talks about shlichus by an adult, somebody who's able to take off truma, sheyeh hekdesho hekdesh v'dibur ochal, again, that he's able to make something hekdesh, to gabe hekdeshus unadorim, ish ksiv, by hekdesh, by an adorim, it says ish, it has to be an adult, v'gabe truma, meis kol ish, asher yidvenu libo v'gomer, it says that by truma as well. So again, even though a katan has no shlichus, as we'll see, there is a zechia, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Beis Amud Aleph.